Perfect. Yep. So officially welcome you to the Ecosystem Jam, Going Beyond Carbon. And yeah, this is the second event that we created in a cooperation or collaboration between different organizations working together in order to actually support regeneration on a global scale and to create frameworks, guidelines that are based on working together rather than competing against each other. So it's all started a couple of months ago. Sam, can you make one slide further? Between these four organizations, Regenerative, Climate Farmers, Regeneration, and Earthshot Labs, getting in touch and speaking about how we can actually scale regeneration while discovering actually that we're working on the same things. We kind of said, okay, we need to start a movement where organizations get together. And I'm giving over to Giselle, who will introduce you a little bit to the things that we are working on.
Yes, our shared vision is around the communities we support, for instance, from different points of view and different focuses. We all work in different lanes, supporting project developers, land stewards, creative designers, methodology developers, scientists, and monitor verifiers. And also we support different processes. So next. Yeah, we support the digital MRV or the registry ledger integration or scientific research and development, curation and peer review, methodology development, science communication. So I guess we're all working towards trying to scale up and as Fabio said, trying to make it possible to a genuine shift towards regenerative management at a global scale to happen, and we can only do that together. So that's the overall shared vision, I guess, from our organizations, and we hope to be inviting all your organizations as well.
Yeah, so to just kind of expand on that a little bit more, I think that like we're all doing really great things in the space, and making a shift to regenerative practices is quite a lot of work. There's the educational piece where you have to like inform on like what regenerative practices are. There's the project development component. There's bringing together the scientific community in supporting like methodology development and communicating that to land stewards and helping guide those processes. There's in-field data collection or providing like a marketplace for digital assets to actually be like traded and sold. If people are going to get paid for their regenerative practices through ecosystem service credits, we have to create paths for those financial incentives to be, kind of developed and a platform for them to be built on. And, in our first kind of presentation where, it was our four organizations, Regen Network, Climate Farmers, Regeneration, and Earthshot presenting together. We're each kind of bringing together a different component of this, whether it's, Regen Network providing the marketplace for ecological regeneration, or Climate Farmers and Regeneration working on project development, or Earthshot Labs bringing in the scientific community, similar to how Restore is, to help kind of like inform and guide these processes. But we recognize that like we're one of many organizations. So, like down here, you can see that there are so many people in this space that are also doing similar things. And the idea with these presentations in this movement is to provide people with a platform to present what they're doing and kind of try to find collaborations between organizations such that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and we can work together to create a system that provides and serves the land stewards in the best way possible. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Oliver to kind of give an introduction to this event. A few housekeeping rules. So the way that we wanted to format questions is we're going to provide a link to a Notion document. And for each organization that presents, there's going to be a section where you can include your questions. So if you have a question for that organization, you can just go ahead and drop it in that section. And there's also a section for more generalized questions. Also, if you drop questions in the chat, we can help migrate those over to the document to help facilitate Yeah, and with that, I'll hand it over to Oliver to introduce Ecosystem Jam.
Thanks so much, man. And I do not have a presentation set up, so this is kind of hard to follow, but I will give a little introduction on why it's so important to look at ecosystems as a whole. Now, that can get a little complex, so we should start from the beginning. Turns out analyzing wholes or entireties is complicated because it represents a shift in paradigm, especially for the dominant world culture that we live in at the moment, which is still centered around sort of an atomistic worldview. Now, atomism is the reduction of elements and entities into their individual component parts. And of course, this has its advantages. I mean, this is the reason why we've been able to excel so much in technology in the last couple of 100 years by really understanding the smaller components and building blocks of the world that we live in. Now, in contrast to that, though, holism is the study of the complexity and the relationships within nested levels of entire systems. And this represents an undervalued yet essential worldview that is crucial in addressing some of the most challenging problems that our society faces at the moment. Now, carbon is often one of these elements that is looked at and dissected into its little parts and how it works in ecosystems. And this can either be looked through an atomistic perspective or through a holistic one, but you can come to very different conclusions, just as an example, to focus in on one component. So carbon, especially in ecosystem services, as we're often talking about it, or in the atmosphere when we're talking about climate change, is looked at as something that is somewhat binary. It's either in the atmosphere where it's doing harm, or it's in the soil where it's doing good. And we can measure that with percentages. How much percentage of carbon increase in our soil do we have? And that's good as it increases. But to look at it in a more holistic way, carbon is a single element that interacts with all of the living systems in an ecosystem and plays different roles as it transforms and moves through these different spaces. So carbon can be absorbed from the atmosphere through plants, which transform it into simple sugars, which help to feed the microbiome in our soil. And it isn't just sequestered there. It's not an innate object. In healthy ecosystems, it's cycled through as it transfers through the digestive tracts of bacteria and is reabsorbed through other organisms. And as decomposition happens, it sometimes oxidizes and goes back into the atmosphere. But of course, it has cycles within the oceans as well, as it's absorbed up to 94% of the excess carbon that we've put into the atmosphere has actually been absorbed by our oceans, which can contribute to acidification, but also has its own cycle within these elements. And this is just one opportunity to look at either an atomistic or holistic view of one of these elements that oftentimes we reduce to a single thing. Now, we are currently undergoing a momentous transition from seeing our world as a collection of parts that are assembled in complicated structures to acknowledging it as one of emergent sums of these parts, which interact with one another in interdependent and complex relationships. Now, we are rediscovering our own role in this beautiful and intricate web, not as dominators, but as stewards and as creative participants in this complexity. So, in short, we want to look at ecosystems as a whole because that's what they are. And any analysis of them as anything less than that will lead to an incomplete understanding, not just of the functions that we derive value from, but also a reduced understanding of our own potential that all of us possess to reclaim our roles as stewards and co-creators in this world that we all share. Now, with that said, let's move now to some of our incredible presenters this evening. We have a really great lineup, and I'll go through the list real quick before I hand it over to individuals. We have Wilhelmine DeLong, who is the Knowledge and Learning Lead at Common Land. We have Bobby Gill, who is the Director of Development and Communications at the Savory Institute. Elijah Goodwin, who is the Ecology and GIS Manager at Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture. And Simeon Max, the Community Engagement Officer at Restore. So Simeon, are you up for it? You ready to start? You've got 6 minutes to present and 2 minutes to talk about how you and your organization integrate the concept of whole ecology in what you do.
Perfect. Let's see. Can you see my screen with the Restore logo?
Yes.
Thanks for the intro. My name is Simeon Max. I'm a forester and now the Community Engagement Officer at Restore. First off, I would like to express how honored I am to be presenting among such renowned organizations and people in the regeneration space. Thanks for having me here. And because we Restore are fairly young, I'm going to give you the background on how we came to be. First, Restore was born out of the Crowther Lab at ETH Zurich University. The Crowther Lab's research is on global ecosystems and how they interact between and within them. The map that you can see here is from a publication from 2019. And this paper quantified the global restoration, forest restoration potential. While this publication surely caused some controversy, I'm sure some of you are aware, it put also to the first time a number on the area that is available for forest regeneration, which helped prioritize ecological restoration on the political agenda. It also helped to advance the discussion that restoration involves much more than just trees or just carbon. During this time and after the publication of the paper, we heard so many reports from large-scale restoration initiatives that failed, millions of trees planted in the wrong places, which resulted in incredibly low survival rates or negative impacts on the local ecosystems and biodiversity. But we knew a lot of this could have been prevented, and science already has a lot of knowledge to do restoration more successfully. And we realized we need to democratize what science already knows and make it applicable and tangible to the people doing the real work on the ground. We want to connect science to practitioners, practitioners to science, and practitioners among each other. This is why our approach is very much bottom up. We want to develop this product together with the core users of Restore. Today, we're a spin-off from the university. Restore was co-developed with Google, but we are now our own separate organization. We have launched the beta version of Restore in June, and we will go fully live with Restore on the 13th of October at the TED Countdown event. The platform is already up and running, but in October, we will remove the password protection and allow everyone everywhere to access it. Using Restore, we want to add more nuance to the discussion about restoration. We want to showcase the diverse initiatives which are already happening and are making a huge difference on the ground already today. We feel that, unfortunately, people still talk a lot about planting trees. And clearly, there are cases where planting individual trees is the right thing to do to regenerate a piece of land. But even in these cases, the job is not done after the seedlings have been put in the ground. And there's other ways, sometimes way more promising, to restore a forest, such as harnessing the power of natural regeneration. Besides, there are still very intact and biodiverse forests which need to be protected or sustainably managed, which sometimes is forgotten. Currently, there is a large variety of projects, biomes, and users represented on the Restore platform. We hope that this network, which is gathering here today, can help complement or contribute, mainly, partly, or agricultural sites. Right now, there are motivated individuals using Restore to identify the native species for their gardens, which they should buy at their local garden center. There are national and international NGOs working on peatlands, grasslands, or savannas. Not least the farmers, who we all depend on for our very livelihoods. And we are very grateful for our connection to and connections through climate farmers to better tie in regenerative farming into the global conversations around ecological restoration. I personally am a big fan of combining trees and agriculture in the form of agroforestry. And we have quite a few of such sites on Restore already, and exploring them on the map makes me really happy. Again, Our goal is to highlight the ecosystems and interventions that currently don't get the attention that they deserve, because they do also have significant impacts on biodiversity and carbon. Over the last 2 years, we talked to hundreds of people, and today more than 2,500 have signed up to Restore. They have shared geofiles with more than 50,000 individual sites. And using Restore, many have just started digitizing their intervention areas and drawing their polygons on the map. What I really like is the statistic on the bottom right. This clearly shows that Restore is a platform for the ones on the ground with an average area of less than 7 hectares. 2/3 of the sites on Restore are just between 0 and 1 hectare large. This founding network has supported us since the ideation phase of Restore in the development of the platform, by telling us about their challenges and needs, by helping us test the platform and reporting bugs, and by sending us photos and stories that enable us to connect with the work that is actually going on out there. What's a platform presentation without looking into the platform? I would like to highlight the major benefits of Restore while showing you the platform. The core of our work is information gathering, transparency, and connectivity. Let's see if that link actually gets me to the browser. And now you should be able to see a global map. Perfect. So this is what you will see when you open Restore. A lot of pins, and each of them represents a restoration or conservation site where an organization or an individual has decided to set their area to public and become visible. So when someone visits the map, you can just zoom into an area, for example, where you've been on vacation recently, or you use the search function or the filter function to find, for example, agroforestry projects in Kenya who have indicated they are looking for financial or volunteer support. For the purpose of showing you the restoration site level insights, I have created a demonstration site here in Oregon. So this is on the left side, the site profile, where an organization can share a description, a website URL, an email address. And this is, as you can see here in the top left, still beta. So we're still working on that. And it will be a decade-long work to perfect this platform, or even longer. But here you can see the information that the projects or the organizations are sharing themselves. For example, the intervention type here is assisted natural regeneration, or as I said earlier, they're looking for expertise, financial support, and volunteer time. So this is what people working on the ground with the real experience, knowledge on the ground can share with science and with the public. And under global predictions, this is what science has to share with the ones who are working on the ground. And just to give you some examples, there are lists on the native potential tree species, herbaceous species, with photos. There are IUCN status, how threatened they are, if they have any edible products, and other plant traits. There is a whole range of information on environmental parameters, such as the mean annual temperature, the elevation, pH. I know the title of this is Beyond Carbon, but as we heard, carbon is an integral part of ecosystems. So I also want to highlight these layers. The current organic carbon in soil and the potential organic carbon in soil. So how much could there be if this was a healthy natural ecosystem? And the difference between these two shows the climate mitigation potential. So how much additional carbon can you sequester when you restore the original ecosystem? And we will add the biomass layers, current and potential, hopefully before the Restore launch or sometime soon. There's information on land cover, the region, just to learn more about the local ccosystem, or scientific monitoring that shows the net primary productivity over the last 20 years, or the total annual evapotranspiration. And we will also add NDVI, the greenness of a pixel, which is an indicator of vegetation health. There's always more, or the link to the original paper and the I symbol. And then if these scientific layers that will also always be updated don't have the response to what you're looking for, you could like zoom out a bit see who else is working in the area. And there's another pin here, so you could check out what they're doing, send them an email and ask your how, what, why questions. So how do you actually plant trees in this soil, or how do you deal with forest fires? Questions that cannot be that easily answered with maps. In terms of transparency, and to round up this platform demo, I just want to highlight the high resolution satellite imagery that's implemented. So for the last 11 years, for any place on Earth, we are hosting up to 30 centimeters high resolution images. There's at least 2 to 3 images available for any point. And very clearly, it shows how the ecosystem is developing, how this forest here is clear cut in, what was the year? Just stop it there. I think one more, 2018. And then if you look at the one here on the top left, you can see that if we go one more further, the trees are already regenerating. So we heard like people like this as a transparency tool and to show that their work on the ground actually makes a difference. Without going into further details, I hope I'll make my time limit. Going to the last slide. We would like to work together with all of you. I would like to reiterate that we're fully committed to collaborate and make the global goals, climate goals, tree goals, whatever ecosystem related goals there are out there, a success. And we know that we can only do this together. Here are a few ideas how we think we can realize this together with you, but feel free to also share your ideas. The first one is that if you're managing land or if you're somehow connected to land, we would like to invite you to upload your sites to Restore and help advance the movement by contributing your knowledge and your learnings to the network. You may not need Restore for the ecological data, but what is clear is that the network needs you. Second, we also encourage you to share your ground data and partner with us and our scientific partners and to use these learnings and share them back with the network. And another opportunity would be to join forces on a Google.org funded project where we are piloting cutting-edge restoration monitoring and technologies. We are starting with a handful of projects this year, but are in the process of selecting more projects to join next year. So let us know if you're interested. So thanks very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Simeon. That was fantastic. We will have time for everybody's questions towards the end, but let's jump right into the next presentation, and I will hand it over to Bobby Gill.
Right, well, I appreciate that. And can folks see my screen? I'm in the presentation mode. All right, I see some head nods. Well, really amazing to be here, everyone. As was mentioned, I'm with the Savory Institute. For those perhaps who are unaware of us, we're named after Alan Savory. He's our co-founder. He's the one who developed holistic management, which I will get into in a little bit. But essentially, Savory Institute, we're a global nonprofit based in Boulder in the States, and we work to facilitate large-scale regeneration of the world's grasslands and the livelihoods of their inhabitants through holistic management. We started the organization back in 2009, and since then have really been leading the regenerative space to equip farmers, ranchers, and pastoralist communities to regenerate their land within culturally relevant and ecologically appropriate contexts. And I think as I dive into what holistic management is more specifically, that culturally relevant and ecologically appropriate context piece will become a little more clear. A bit about how we do our work and how we engage with the boots on the ground. Like I said, we started through the work of Alan Savory, but now we are this global movement. We have a global network that as of today is 50 Savory hubs, which are essentially locally led, locally owned local learning centers for boots on the ground to come and learn all the different aspects of holistic management. We exist in 28 countries. We've got 148 educators. We've trained a little over 14,000 people, and the land that they manage represents just under 16 million hectares. Why am I not forwarding? There we go. So holistic management. This is a new graphic that I've made to try to give folks a new perspective on what holistic management is, because a lot of people, when they hear holistic management, they think of holistic planned grazing, which is a key component of it. So holistic planned grazing is down here as one of the planning procedures that are taught within holistic management. But holistic management itself encapsulates so much more. It's really a human and nature-centered design and decision-making framework. I really appreciate what Oliver was saying in his introduction, giving that overview of how nature-based systems are infinitely complex, and it's really about those relationships and the patterns of relationship within living organisms. And that's what holistic management is. It's a framework that teaches planning procedures that are important and ecological literacy and all the different aspects that are important in regenerative ag. But more so than that, it's a framework for managing complexity and making decisions amidst the complexity of land and livestock working together. And so with that, that's kind of what's here on the right side of the graphic, where we've got the holistic context. That's someone saying, what is your North Star that's going to guide all of your decision making and everything that you do? And then we provide a framework with context checks that allow people to make decisions that moves in the direction that they want for their quality of life and what they want their environment to look like. This really focuses on the social and the people aspects of regeneration. I know there's a tendency for us to dive into the practices that we do, like the planned grazing, and yes, those are important, but without the social aspects, it's not sustainable in the long run. Now, since we're talking about going beyond carbon today, thought I'd dive in a little bit more to the ecosystem processes. So those ecosystem processes right here that we teach within holistic management, there's 4 of them that we look at, and those kind of underpin all the decision-making we do in land management. And those 4 ecosystem processes are energy flow, which is making sure that there's actively photosynthesizing vegetative cover. You're maximizing that use of sunlight, turning it into usable forms. There's the water cycle, so making sure that you've got effective rainfall utilization. There's the nutrient cycle, so making sure that there's adequate decomposition and reincorporation of nutrients back into the soil food web. And then community dynamics. That's the diversity of living organisms that are all in symbiotic relationship with one another, building complexity and resilience across a land base. There's this aspect where, I think what a lot of us here today are noticing that there's this hyper focus on carbon as the single important indicator of ecosystem health. But carbon's just one piece of that puzzle. And in reality, there's carbon, water, and energy that are all flowing continuously throughout living organisms. And you can't just isolate one of those and optimize for it. You need to optimize all of the various ecosystem processes. And so this is a core piece of what we teach to land managers, so that when they are out there making decisions on how they manage their operation, they're ensuring that all of these different ecosystem processes are being optimized accordingly. Now, we have a new program out within the last couple of years. It's called EOV, or Ecological Outcome Verification. This is essentially our science-based monitoring protocol that tracks land health, trends it over time, looks at a variety of leading and lagging indicators. So we're looking at above ground and below ground, things like carbon, water, biodiversity. And so that's to help inform management decisions for the farmer or the rancher, but it's also to help differentiate in the marketplace for those that are looking for it. Just to look a little more in detail at EOV, it informs land management. It's part of that feedback loop to achieve regenerative outcomes, helps us keep a common language when we're comparing and learning from all these different global experiences that we have. There's market differentiation, as I had mentioned, and that can lead into accessing different environmental service markets, although we have not yet done that. I think it's poised to do so. And of course, it scientifically demonstrates the benefits of regenerative livestock production. So what does it look like more specifically? Annually, we do short-term monitoring. The short-term monitoring looks at the leading indicators, things like live canopy abundance, living organisms, different types of grasses, plant litter, dung decomposition, soil capping, bare soil, all of these. This is done on an annual basis. It's done fairly quickly, so that way it is affordable and scalable to the producer. You know, we're not requiring big technology that's required to come on out to your property. That would really be cost prohibitive for a lot of folks. Component of this, once all these short-term monitoring indicators are looked at, this gives you what is called the Ecological Health Index. Ecological Health Index is a score based on a composite of these different indicators that are managed, and it's compared to the best possible ecological expression that we know of within the ecoregion. So, you know, I know there was a question in that Notion document of how this scales out at the global level. We look at things by ecoregion. So for example, in the United States, we use the Nature Conservancy's level 3 ecoregion map. There's 64 different ecoregions in the US. And we use those to make sure that we're comparing to the best ecological expression we know of in an ecoregion. And that really allows for that apples to apples comparison. Then in addition to the short-term monitoring, we also have long-term, which is done at the baseline year 0 and then every 5 years. These are more of the lagging indicators. They're a little slower to turn over, so there's no need to measure them any more regularly than that. And so this is taking the soil samples, sending them out to the lab. So we're looking at soil carbon, various different aspects of soil health, also water filtration and foliar cover. To do the long-term monitoring, we set up transects. Those are all GPS located. There's photo plots. All the data and the photos from EOV then get uploaded into our online database that we have, which then allows our global quality assurance team to go through and monitor the data, check for accuracy, notice any variance in data or things that don't look right, and point them out, and also conduct random audits to ensure quality assurance. Looking at some of these indicators, you know, talking about the ecosystem processes that I looked at earlier, these are what the different indicators look at. So the different things we're looking at in EOV correlate back to those 4 ecosystem processes. So when we look at the water cycle, we're looking at things like bare ground, litter abundance, capping, wind erosion, water erosion. And then energy flow, you know, how much of that solar energy is being captured by vegetation? Again, bare ground is a good indicator of that. We've got live canopy abundance. Oh, I'm not switching pages. There we go. And then nutrient cycle, more of those, litter, microfauna, dung decomposition. You know, is the dung being reincorporated back into the soil? Those are things that you can actively monitor. And perhaps those are things that, you know, don't require being sent out to a lab, but that is important for a land manager to know. You know, walk around and see, is the dung from your livestock actually decomposing back into soil organic matter? Yes or no? And how do you tell? So when we're doing this monitoring, we have EOV monitors and verifiers. Those are different levels based on what exactly they're looking at. But ideally, they'd be walking the field with the farmer or the rancher, pointing things out, asking questions. So it's not just someone doing this research in isolation and then handing a report afterwards. Yes, the report is going to be handed afterwards. You get all this data, but you're walking the field and learning with the monitor, seeing all these things up close so that it can inform your management decisions and know, oh, interesting, there's a species of grass I hadn't seen before. Thanks for pointing that out. Now I'm going to be on the lookout for that the next time I'm walking my land. The last piece that I didn't go into is the community dynamics. And so that's looking at the biodiversity of species and all of their relationships. So once we have EOV, what do we do with it? Of course, like I said, it goes to the land manager so that they can know that they are in fact regenerating their land, and they can use that to inform their management decisions. But for many people, they also want to differentiate in the marketplace. And that's where our land to market program comes in. So essentially, we're taking EOV verified farms and ranches, and we're taking the products that comes off of that property and connecting that with philosophically aligned brands that are interested in taking those products to market. We are working with a host of different brands, from large multinational corporations like General Mills, who owns Epic Bar, to Kering, which is the large luxury brand that owns Gucci and Stella McCartney and Balenciaga. Timberland has a pair of regenerative, they got a couple pairs of regenerative boots and sneakers out with leather coming from our network. But we also have smaller regional brands and up-and-comers. So this is working across food and fiber, working with brands both big and small, ultimately trying to make sure that we are maintaining authenticity of the term regenerative. There's a lot of excitement in the regenerative space, and I think all of us here can agree that there is a lot to it, more so than just carbon. So that's why we have EOV really to track all of those different leading and lagging indicators to give that holistic view of land-based health, and then carrying that through to the marketplace so that consumers can be confident that the products that they're buying are in fact regenerating land, and we've got the data to back that up. And then just one last little quote from Alan saying that ultimately the only wealth that can sustain any community, economy, or nation is derived from the photosynthetic process, green plants growing on regenerating soil. And that, my friends, is that.
Nice. Thanks, Bobby. I'm jumping just fast in here. Yeah, this was already inspiring. Also inspiring that so many people are joining. And I just want to give a heads up to everyone who just joined. So I welcome you to the Ecosystem Jam, where we actually focus on regeneration and how we regenerate ecosystems. And we invited different companies and organizations to speak here. What is their focus, how they're actually introducing ecosystem regeneration in their work. And we just had Simeon speaking about the Restore open source platform that is combining field measurements and satellite imagery and connecting this worldwide on a global map. And Bobby Gill speaking about the Sabre Institute, who are actually connecting stakeholders, farmers, rangers all around the world and building tools to improve ecosystems on a global scale. And I'm giving over to Wilhelmine for presenting Common Land. So yeah, feel free to share your screen. And we just shared the Notion page for collecting questions, feedback, and also calls to action. So feel free also to write your ideas, your calls to action in the Notion board and share it with the whole community.
Right, thank you. Can you see this full screen now? Perfect.
Yes.
So also for me, I feel really honored to be part of this group, and I think we're all doing beautiful work. And what I love already is that there's lots of diversity in approaches, in niches, and all the more diversity, the better. So I'm really excited to see all of that. So I've tried to pull out some key elements for today, and I'll try to keep it in the 10 minutes. So I'm just checking the time. All right. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Common Land as an organization, and I focused on the two questions that were given, which is like, how do we view an ecosystem perspective as a whole, and how do we integrate it into our work? Just briefly, Common Land is an organization, a not-for-profit system developer, we call ourselves, of large-scale landscape restoration projects. So we're trying to bring in solutions at a landscape scale to cover biodiversity, climate change, mitigation, regenerative agriculture, and revitalization of communities. So our ambition or our goal really is to realize large-scale landscape restoration together with others and creating kind of like a new norm for how we manage ecosystems. And to make this happen, we also developed the 4 Turns framework, which I'll go into a little bit. There are some process steps and some elements. I'll touch on the main ones that are interesting for now. And we also spend a lot of time and energy with partners on aligning them in landscape partnerships and developing regenerative businesses that can actually create traction and action on the ground and can scale. And we were founded in 2013 by ICN and Business School, Rotterdam School of Management, but we're also collaborating with a lot of more established and new organizations in this space. So let's start with the good news. I thought we could all use some good news. The good news is, of course, we can regenerate, we can restore, and the Luz Plateau is a much used example of how you can actually restore ecosystem functioning. Of course, this is a specific context and a specific program, but it is still very inspiring to actually see that this can be done. And just for fun, I added another one, which from satellite perspective, to actually see the scale and magnitude of this effort. And it can be super inspiring. So the question was, how do we actually see an ecosystem as a whole? And I would say the perspective that we often use is that we really feel like we rely on healthy ecosystems. They provide us with our food, water, clean air, climate stability, social and economic wealth, and even our happiness and well-being. So if you feel connected to a place, it can also give a fulfilling life. So I try to sort of differentiate between ecosystem restoration and landscape restoration a little bit. They're often interchangeably used, and that's fine, and that's not a problem. But just to give a clarity on how we sort of see it. So ecosystem restoration is very much the recovery of biotic and abiotic processes in the ecosystem. And we tend to sort of zoom out just one step further, which is the landscape restoration perspective. And that also adds not just ecological functions, but also revitalizing social and economic functions within that landscape, right? So it's like almost like a local regenerative economy, you could say. And in terms of the sort of human perspective or worldview, we also work a lot with this idea of creating almost like a human consciousness shift from egocentric thinking to ecocentric thinking. So we tend to see ourselves as the superhuman that sort of controls the universe, and we can actually tame nature. But as we're seeing now, we're actually super vulnerable, and actually should respect the interconnectedness of the world that Oliver actually opened up with today, to sort of find our humble place in the web of life, basically. And that really creates a different kind of leadership as well in understanding your role, not just in an ecosystem, in a natural world, but also in the social interactions. Like everybody has a role to play. There's not one person that's the boss, right? And we actually sort of, poured that into a framework called the 4 Returns framework. We're actually trying to shift the conversation towards sort of multi-value creation in a region or a landscape. So it's about return of inspiration, so giving people a sense of hope and a sense of purpose, a social capital, so bringing back jobs, business activity, education, and security in an area. It's about natural capital, of course, restoring biodiversity, soil quality, water quality, and capturing carbon. And last but not least, by doing that sustainably, you can actually realize a long-term sustainable profit instead of short-term exploitative forms of profit making. So how do we actually integrate it into our work? Like I said, we're working with the 4 Returns framework. So what we're seeing in a lot of degraded areas around the world is there is a loss of a lot of things, and not just soil quality, but also a loss of hope, people moving out of the area, migration. We have also conflicts over water, so lack of security, loss of employment. So there's a lot of different things sort of going down, whereas you can actually, if you get it right, you can actually turn it around and start to regenerate on all those fronts. So it's moving away from the maximalization of return on investment per hectare towards creating multiple values in an area. And I've used the below image here from left to right, which is, I think, really nice. It's from ecosystem restoration camps, just to showcase how you can actually, transition towards a regenerated ecosystem together with people. So we also work with a 3 zoning, and it's not a sort of exhaustive zoning approach. It's very much meant as a kitchen table conversation starter. So can we actually, we live in a world where it's either natural zone or it's a productive economic zone, and the two shall never meet. And when they meet, it's not a happy connection, because there's a lot of fertilizer or pesticide use sort of flowing into the natural area. There's no sort of a nature inclusive or regenerative zone where you can actually have products grown in a more regenerative, nature friendly way. And of course that's growing, and the movement's growing, so that's beautiful. But can we stretch this combined zone even bigger and make the monotonous high production monoculture landscapes less dominant, basically. And the 20 years, I think it's a super important one, and also not to be underestimated. We live in a world where 3-year, 5-year project program cycles are normal. And I mean, it's hard to get long-term funding, and I'm not confident that we will move beyond these short cycles, but can we constantly sort of stretch our thinking towards 10-year, 20-year thinking at minimum? Because like we saw in China, it takes at least 20 years to sort of get an ecosystem fully functioning again, and people sort of, refinding their place. So that shapes a lot of our thinking as well. Just some examples. So here are just 4 of our sort of first landscapes that we've started working in, and it's starting to expand to other countries. But just to give you an example, so we've started working with Alvalal in Spain. on a 1 million hectare landscape together with them, and they're mobilizing hundreds of farmers to transition from rain-fed agriculture and almonds towards regenerative production with more, no tilling, green cover, the whole full swing of what we consider to be regenerative. And they've also set up a business, La Almendresa, which is sort of tying back to this ancient agricultural integrated system, and now selling regenerative almonds in German supermarkets, but also elsewhere. In South Africa, we're working with our partner Living Lands and Grounded, and the Baviaans Kloof Defco is a local company working together with farmers to transition from intensive goat farming towards more diversified use of the land and letting some areas actually regenerate an active restoration. In Australia, we're working with the stock-listed forage company Wide Open Agriculture, and they have a brand, Dirty Clean Food, with a really cool platform as well with beautiful products. Actually, Alvalal, the Spanish example, also has a landscape product platform, which is about to launch, I think. And in the Netherlands, which is around the corner here, I just went there this morning. It's in the peat meadow landscape, and they're working with mostly dairy farmers, but also other farmers in the area to see what can the future be of this landscape, because it's peatland and it's being intensively used from dairy production. What do we do with this groundwater level? Because the Netherlands, it's below sea level, so we gotta, change the land use, but we have to do it together. So these are just some examples. These are some products that are, being made in the landscape, being sold either regionally or internationally or mostly locally. I see this to be sort of like a landscape market emerging. And I just briefly touching on how can we value multiple services that are being produced in a sustainable land management practice. We're also trying to figure out, together with investors and academics and business professionals, to unpack the different values that can be created by looking at a landscape and regenerating it. And how can we translate that to a monetary value to start having conversations with governments, investors, to invest in landscape restoration. And so if you want to actually join the conversation with us and try to figure out this big puzzle, feel free to reach out to my colleague Jasper. He's working on this together also with Alejandro. I think he's also here today. And lastly, I wanted to show an example of 3 Kale. So they're based in the UK, and I spoke to them just this week, and I thought it was so cool to just give an example of their work. So they're working with landscape enterprise networks, basically trying to connect land managers and farmers with, they call it beneficiaries or beneficiary funders. So it could be a water company that has maybe a factory in a landscape and has thus an important stake in that landscape and wants to also pay for sustainable land management practices that are being performed in that landscape. So they can actually enter into a contract, and then the water company gets the question, how much is this or this practice worth to you? How much do you value clean waterways? And then they come to an agreement on the funding. And I thought it was such an awesome example of how this can be done. I know Regen Network is also here today. I saw it in the chat. So I think these are some beautiful examples of diversifying from carbon focused to, well, there are lots of different values that can be rewarded, right? So I thought that was a cool example. And just to close, I found this article, what was it, a couple of weeks back. Indeed, this idea of having carbon projects I think it was in, the west of the US. Of course, a lot of people know there were huge fires, but they noted here that a lot of these projects were actually carbon capture projects. Some of these lands were carbon capture projects. So this shows again that it's so important to look at the ecosystem within which your project takes place. Of course, this is a bigger problem, but I thought it was an interesting example. So just some short reflection, and this is my last slide, so I'm done. I was thinking a little bit about the question, and I feel like about moving beyond carbon, I think we're really selling ourselves short if we let the potential of regeneration, landscape restoration be reduced to carbon capture and vegetation, because carbon capture potential of restoration is actually huge, but ecosystem functioning is actually the foundation of our society. So if carbon capture capacity, in my opinion, is actually dwarfed by the capacity for ecosystems to carry us into the future, with clean air, nutritious food from a healthy soil, reconnection to each other and place, stable climates with less extreme weather patterns, sustainable long-term financial income for regenerative businesses, and regional and local communities. So this is what I was thinking about, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Wilhelmine. That was wonderfully explained. Now I'm going to hand over again quickly to Elijah Goodwin, our last speaker for this evening, and then we'll go from there into the questions. So Elijah, take it away.
All right, great. Let me just share my screen here. I'm Elijah Goodwin. I'm the Ecology and GIS manager here at Stone Barn Center in Westchester County, New York. And I just wanted to introduce, also on the call today is Shane Hardy, my colleague and our ecology director, who'll be joining in for the Q&A portion today. So it's actually sort of fitting that we're going last for my presentation today. I think I'm gonna, the presentations that have come before have been wonderful and have kind of given us this high level overview of some of the work being done. And I'd like to take us a little bit into the weeds, so sometimes literally. So let's go ahead and move through. So I'm just gonna do a quick introduction to our organization, and then get to actually looking at some real data and some of the work we're doing here. But Stone Barn Center is a nonprofit dedicated to shaping an ecological food culture, and regenerative and sustainable agriculture is a large part of that equation. We really have our irons in many fires, and working with companies and big organizations like Open Team, working with researchers, academic researchers, working with businesses, and particularly working with our restaurant partner Blue Hill to come at it from the side of chefs and food flavor. So in addition to crops, Stone Barn Center is conducting rotational multi-species holistic grazing on about 400 acres of public and private land. And much of this is in an innovative cooperative management agreement with a state park preserve. So it's public land that we're grazing livestock on. And the whole goal is to use livestock as a conservation tool, agriculture as conservation, rather than, the other way around. So a lot of the work I'm going to be talking about today deals with that work with that holistic grazing program. All right, so just a quick overview, we have a very extensive ecological monitoring program. We are monitoring, doing bird counts at 40 count stations focused around 10 fields. We're monitoring insect diversity, which I'm going to talk about a little later. Plant biodiversity at 74 grassland transects and 18 forest.
I think your internet connection is not the best, Elijah, and also your screen got stuck. Ah, perfect. You're muted.
Sorry, I actually hardwired to avoid this problem, and somehow it still happened. Let me just share my screen again here. All right, everybody seeing that? Okay, great. So I don't know where I dropped out here, but so plant biodiversity, we're monitoring at 74 grassland transects and 18 forest trailside transects, where we're managing invasive species with pigs and goats. We just started a extensive water quality management program at 14 stations, looking at our impact of the local watershed. We do, as we were talking, carbon work is an important part of what we do, and we've been working with a lot of researchers to ground truth and test out new technology for carbon monitoring. We're currently looking at 300, roughly 300 randomly stratified points across the landscape at 0 to 15 and 15 to 30. Deep carbon transects down to 1 meter every 5 to 10 years. And then yearly soil health testing and water infiltration testing at 16 spots on those deep carbon transect locations as well. We also are tracking our management activities across the landscape. So this map you're looking at now, all those solid colors are 2020 livestock pastures across the landscape, layered over each other. And everywhere you see a border around the fields, the color indicates some sort of management activity. Yellow is mowing, purple is amendments, red is tillage, and so on. So all that is getting recorded into our system as well. So what I really wanted to talk about today, though, is, there is a lot of focus, as folks have talked about, on soil carbon and soil monitoring. But one thing we've been seeing as we have taken over this land that was previously in a very traditional set stocking and haying operation and has some, fairly severe ecological impacts, we've been seeing regenerative response very quickly in biodiversity measures. So one of the things we do is bird monitoring, including point counts, but also monitoring a nest box program and our grassland obligate birds that only nest in the grasslands. So open field bird species, we just put in a 40-box bluebird swallow trail going through part of our fields, and it had an amazing and immediate response. In the first year we put up the nest box trail, we had every station was occupied at some point during the season. We fledged 64 tree swallows and 19 bluebirds in that first season. That was this season. In our first season, we fledged 53 tree swallows and 16 bluebirds. So the response has been rapid to that habitat modification. And again, it shows that we have a very healthy insect population out on our fields. And as an aside, that nest box program actually could be a solution to monitoring challenges. Anyone who's tried to do bird monitoring knows it takes a lot of expertise in order to have a really robust bird monitoring program. So by putting up nest boxes and monitoring the reproductive productivity in those nest boxes, it actually makes a way to monitor bird activity on your field in a much more manageable way that can be done with someone with a lot less expertise. As I mentioned, we're focusing on grassland obligate birds. And we found that bobolinks, which are a grassland obligate species, returned almost immediately with the change in the management and began nesting in our grasslands again. We measure the reproductive success. We've had several pairs nesting each year. We've fledged 8 young in our first year successfully, 8 the next, and this year we've fledged 10. So we're slowly increasing the population. But again, it's a really amazing response because usually it takes about 5 years for birds to adjust to changes in management. Hopeful signs for more grassland obligate species who are showing up. And again, part of our grazing program is to adaptively graze around these birds' nesting habitats as we are starting to get these populations started. We also do point counts for bird diversity. That takes the most resources and expertise to carry off, but you do get a very comprehensive data set, and we have seen an overall increase in species richness each year through those counts. Next, I wanted to talk about our plant monitoring program. So a lot of this data just came across my desk this morning. So we're doing those intensive plant transects, and we've seen yearly increases in native species abundance and occurrence. We have shown in just the last year alone an increase in average species richness per transect, an increase in average native abundance per transect, and a decrease in average invasive abundance per transect. And we're still in the process, actually, as we speak, of analyzing all this data. But from 2019 to 2020, I know we also saw a significant increase in our total species richness across the landscape. So very rapid plant response to the changes in management. The last thing I wanted to talk about was we have just started an insect monitoring program. And insect monitoring using traditional morphological identification is very difficult. It takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of expertise. It's hard to find someone who has the expertise to get a kind of holistic picture of an agricultural and grassland landscape. And we, in fact, tried early on and failed to get much useful data out of a lot of work. So this year we have partnered with the University of Guelph to create a DNA barcoding based insect monitoring program using malaise traps, pitfall traps, and sweep netting. And then those samples actually get sent for species level identifications through DNA barcoding. It's has the potential for animal biodiversity monitoring to be the most cost and time efficient method out there. Once you've set up a library, which can be done by various organizations for a particular bioregion, you can do bulk sampling, which costs about $50 a sample. You need minimal on-farm expertise. And the key there is, the University of Guelph is doing a global malaise track program. So they had an infrastructure in place for high throughput of samples and collecting samples from various locations all around the world. But there are other labs that are working with DNA barcoding technology. And so there's the potential to build an infrastructure to do this kind of monitoring on a large scale. And again, it may be the best way to monitor insects. And I just wanted to mention our response to regeneration. We are waiting on our first batch of data analysis right now, but anecdotally, we see this is one malaise trap sample from 24 hours on one of our transects. And you can see the diversity in here. We've seen the diversity increasing on our fields. In fact, the livestock farmers have come to me and asked, why am I seeing so many more insects in the field? And we can see it in the response of the indicators like the bird populations that feed on insects and how they are thriving. And so this insect diversity data has a opportunity to be a real missing piece of the puzzle in connecting the plant diversity and the soil data and the water data and the bird data all together in one holistic piece. If you want to learn more, you can go to stonebarncenter.org. I also have a link on here for more information on our conservation action plan, and I will put the link to this presentation in the chat immediately following this. So thanks very much.
Fantastic, Elijah. Thank you for that presentation. And thanks to all of you who took the time to be here and to present the work from your organizations. All of this is incredibly inspiring. And we have a little bit of time left for questions. So I'm going to actually, instead of asking individual ones, which I have a feeling might leave out a few people at the end, I will pose a question that we'll work through individually with everybody, which is, given all of these diverse parameters that we're working with, are there any key ones that you have noticed that are major indicators for overall health? Or is it more important to get regionally specific or context specific data and measure those based on location and the context in which either restoration or any other kind of actions are happening? With that said, I will start with, we'll go in reverse order. Simeon, would you like to answer that first?
Sure. I think I have to disappoint that there is not a single parameter that we can use to assess ecosystem health and biodiversity. I can explain though one study that we're just starting at the Crowther Lab, which is about looking at satellite imagery, a photo from the top of an ecosystem or a forest, and using machine learning and AI to identify how diverse that picture looks like, and then correlating this with real data on the ground. So many of our studies, or most of the studies at the Crowther Lab, are based on ground data from 1.2 million research plots all around. So when we know what the satellite data looks like and what the ground data, the real data is, we can start pairing it up and then maybe start deducing from a photo from a mere satellite image on how diverse the ecosystem actually is. This is work that we're just starting, so it may take a while until we can make definitive answers there, but it may be an easy way to assess ecosystem diversity.
Fantastic. Bobby, do you want to weigh on that and the EOV system of analyzing the health of ecosystems? Do you find any major indicators that are fairly consistent among diverse ecosystems? Or is it important to really have these be specifically tailored to the diversity of spots that you're looking at?
It's a really good question, and something that's really important within holistic management is embracing that individuality and the unique context that each person finds themselves in and what's unique about their land base and what it needs. So, I'm trying to go through the list of different indicators in EOV and see like which one is more important than the next. But, to your point about, when you take that reductionist approach and try to isolate one individual variable and, elevate it against everything else, I think that's where we fail ourselves in terms of looking at how living systems operate. And so to that, I think that it's the relationships between species that is probably the most important, because it's not about an individual attribute that is optimized or maximized or has the highest number or the greatest increase, but rather what are the relationships between species, and are those functioning at the highest potential? So I think moving in the direction of those 4 ecosystem processes that I talked about, community dynamics, I think that is an indicator that the other ecosystem processes, the energy flow, the nutrient cycle, the water cycle, that those are all optimized. Because if the living organisms, whether those are plants or animals or bugs or fungi, if those are optimized, then the other ecosystem processes probably are. So that's kind of a long roundabout answer saying, I don't think there's one individual one, but it's probably in that direction of biodiversity and optimized, abundance of species somehow.
Yeah, very well explained. And Wilhelmine, I know I'm going to actually rephrase this for your context a little bit. You have projects through Common Land in a number of different places, but you also work a lot with the economy, the business models of these projects. What would you say are the indicators that you most look for healthy and holistic success of these projects, including the ecosystem, but also the economic aspect?
Ooh, yeah, well, I mean, we've been trying to tackle that for a couple of years now. So we constantly have to look at all 4, right? And of course, the natural capital requires some in-depth digging. And I just wanted to say that John Liu, the famous founder of Ecosystem Restoration Camp, and also our ambassador, he talks about actually on ecosystem level, he says you need to look at biomass, biodiversity, and accumulated organic matter. I'll leave it to him to explain how exactly, but I remember he's it's almost like a mantra. He says, look at those 3 things always. But when I look at it from the 4 returns perspective, so it's about social connectivity. How many people are connecting to each other? How motivated are they over time? Are the regenerative businesses, how are they set up? What is the ownership model? Are they healthy financially over longer periods of time? For natural capital, we're looking both at hardcore natural zone restoration, rehabilitation, but also the regenerative agriculture piece. Social capital is also about job creation, permanent jobs, seasonal jobs. So it's like a full sort of Rubik's Cube of keeping a bit of a feeling for, are we headed in the right direction? So it's more a direction of travel rather than meeting targets. And we need to constantly be aware of that. Once you have an indicator, it has the tendency to become a target. So we're constantly wary of that. Yeah. Yeah,
that's very good to be aware of, and I really like this this overall look at the health that goes beyond just the natural system itself, because of course people need to get a yield out of these systems, and they have to have a profit, even if it's not monetary, for people to continue to be able to put energy into these and to steward them. Now, Elijah, out of all of these groups here, you're the one most specifically working on an individual landscape, and obviously there are many moving parts within that. And in your presentation, we could see just how many metrics that you're looking at to assess the health and how this project is developing. Do you see correlations between things like biodiversity, soil carbon, and vegetation that would indicate that some of them are inextricably linked? Or is it still difficult to extrapolate some of this data and figure out exactly how it's connected?
I think, as with anything in ecology, it's messy, but it's most definitely connected, and we do see correlations. And as we work through a lot of the analysis of this data, I think we'll see more of those correlations. So I would say yes, we definitely see fields with the greater soil health have greater response in terms of the plant diversity. Fields with greater plant diversity seem to have greater bird diversity and nesting success. So these things kind of build on each other. And I'd like to echo what Bobby said about kind of a holistic view. But also just with the caveat that knowing that for farmers, monitoring is hard. It takes time, it takes cost, having consultants, even if those consultants are paid for from somewhere else, it takes time away from, the work that needs to be done. So that's one of the reasons we're really excited about this insect monitoring, because I think it has the potential to be a relatively easy metric. And because insects kind of form those connections between plant community and bird community, and because insects themselves occupy such a variety of trophic levels, it can be a really kind of holistic measure given limited time and resources.
Very well said. And it seems like we've got time to go through one more, and I'll start from the top again. This is a little bit of an elaboration on a question from Giselle from the Regen Network, who is asking, in essence, what are some of the main challenges as we shift towards more holistic methodologies? We talk about quantifying these things and perhaps giving economic value to them so that there's an incentive from businesses, even political incentives oftentimes, for people to focus on things that perhaps we don't have a monetary return for yet and are difficult to incentivize based on the way business as usual is done, right? Are there any other real roadblocks or challenges in getting people to value these things that are traditionally overlooked? Simeon?
Yeah, I think, as I've said in the beginning of my presentation, we've literally talked to hundreds of restoration practitioners over the last months and years, and they all shared a whole set of challenges and pain points that they're facing when implementing projects. And there are, like, they depend on the type of intervention they're doing or the type of organization they run, but there are some things that are really common across the board. One of the main limitations is funding. And I think funding is still very much going through old and traditional channels, and how funding is distributed needs to change a lot. And there are cool approaches that groups represented here are trialing based on modern technologies such as blockchain and AI. And that will certainly revolutionize the space, particularly when we start to actually finance monitoring and make all of these indicators that we just talked about a reality, and start documenting the data and then start analyzing the data, because I think the technology is here, the computing power is here. We're lacking this data. Other topics that were very common across the board were transparency. And again, transparency kind of is the basis to become a trustworthy project and to eventually be trustworthy to the donors and funders. And information sharing across organizations is also something that many said, hey, I'm not even aware who works next to me or like a few kilometers away in the same forest with the same challenges. So connecting this, and I think other industries, the steel industry, the building industry, they have professional networks, they have worker associations, but this does not exist yet in the regenerative space in that extent yet. And these associations are just emerging and need to be strengthened. So I'm envisioning a social media for restoration, and I think this very resonates with many of you here.
Indeed. And Bobby, now I know that you're very good at explaining this, especially because Savory is very well known for working directly with ranchers and grazers and other land managers around the world for communicating the real importance of taking care of the landscape beyond things that you can get an immediate monetary return from. Can you talk about some of the essence of that message that really connects with people who perhaps have been managing in a way that is degrading their resource base up until now, to understand the connection, not just between how they manage and the profits that they get at the end, but also what they leave to their communities and perhaps to next generations? Yeah,
I mean, it's a tough one. We work with folks of all different walks of life all across the globe. And, I wish it was as simple as presenting some information to someone and them changing their mind and then changing their practices. But the reality is that when you're talking to a rancher and you're saying, hey, do something differently, you're essentially saying the way you're doing it currently is wrong, and the way that your parents did it is wrong, and the way that your great-grandparents did it is wrong, and so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of tradition baked into that. Similarly, there's, in rural areas, community ties are really strong, and you don't necessarily want to be the one that sticks your neck out to do things differently, because you're going to suffer from tall poppy syndrome and you're going to get chopped off. You're going to be exiled from your community or ostracized or, looked at differently. And if you really depend on your community, for those relationships, it's hard to go a different path than everyone else. So I often find that data is certainly helpful, looking at these various indicators and looking at, whether it's ecological data or financial data or, production data, whatever it may be. I think these are all helpful, but ultimately what we need to do is get people to see the world differently. And I think that is a different type of paradigm shift that moves from the head down to the heart. And so data is helpful in terms of allowing people to understand how things work. But I think through storytelling, people can see themselves in the shoes of someone else, and they can see through a diversity of stories of, okay, holistic planned grazing isn't just done in this one way. It's the Maasai in Kenya, it's gauchos in Patagonia, it's sheep herders in Norway, it's cowboys in the American West. Like, these are all very different contexts. But if you show the struggles that everyone goes through and the way that their lives have been transformed and, kind of show that hero's journey, I think that resonates a bit more with folks so that they can understand their place in the world and perhaps envision it differently. And once they start seeing the world differently, then the practices will change. And the data will, of course, back that up and be helpful along the way.
Yeah, very well said. And that's very much in line with what we've seen working with the farming communities here in Europe as well. It's certainly not unique either to grazers or even really to farmers. A lot of us go through these types of challenges and these community pressures. Now, Wilhelmine, with this context that you work with through the economic side and through the land regeneration side, where do you see some of the biggest roadblocks in I suppose a lot of the people you work with are already convinced, and it's one of the reasons why you start these partnerships. But in outreach, and considering that you work a lot with the Knowledge and the Learning Center, transmitting this information, perhaps when it's new to people and it represents that paradigm shift that we talked about at the beginning. How do you get through that?
Well, I think the part of the complexity is that regeneration is complex. So, I mean, part of the blockages is that we have to deal with so many different things. So it requires a different form of leadership, right? So, of course, it's great if you have like basic project skills, but I mean, you need to completely change the way you look at your business or your organization. You need to like be able to adapt and respond to the situation as necessary. That can also be a farmer managing his farm more holistically. I mean, it's a different form of looking at your operation, and that requires sort of a kind of like an attunement to what you're doing. So we're also therefore working with the Theory U, and I don't know if people are familiar with it, but it's basically a leadership capacity building approach that helps people to tap into their like collective leadership skills. Like, how can I become a leader of the future in my own right? So it can be a farmer, but also a CEO of a company, in being able to sort of look at the system you're operating in. I think that's, if there were one thing, I think that's the biggest challenge. We need to move from a specialized, compartmentalized world to seeing a world in complexity, and not being overwhelmed by it, but being able to sort of like breathe and think, okay, there are 10 different things I need to look at now. What does this situation ask from me now? That can be a grazing, like a grazing management decision, but it could also be a landscape skill, water catchment level decision you need to make, or a community conflict that you need to manage. So, I mean, there's so many different things you need to like tune into and respond to. So that requires, yeah, a different set of sort of future leadership skills, you could say. I think that could be like the biggest one. Yeah.
Nice. Now, look, we're getting close to the end time. I don't want to skip over Elijah here. If you've got a quick answer, I really want to touch on the fact that you've presented such really cool data here, but perhaps you've seen some of the same difficulties that I have in communicating just numbers and statistics to people who sometimes don't connect with those things. On a personal level, despite seeing all of the numbers and perhaps having a much better concept of what they mean than the average person, what are the things that really connect with you? How do you feel or know that things are moving in the right direction beyond just the metrics that come back from it?
Yeah, well, and I think, again, I'd like to echo Bobby. I think storytelling is really, and that's something we focus on here at Stone Barns. And so it's not just the numbers, but seeing a video of the swallows swarming over the cattle, feeding on insects, and that kind of mutual relation, telling the story of that mutual relationship of the bird populations responding to our management, responding to the insects, but then also helping reduce fly pressure on our cattle and reducing the stress on the cattle, potentially leading to better meat. So I think the storytelling aspect in bringing in multimedia, bringing in you know, not just numbers, but a narrative really helps that out.
Very well said. Love those answers from all of you guys. And before we go, I want to hand back to Fabio, who was really instrumental in organizing this. And I'll let you kind of give us some ending words and see us out before the end of this event.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks, Oliver, for this great moderation and on-the-point questions. And thanks, everyone, for presenting, for being part of this. Thanks to the whole audience who joined. I'm gonna stay for 30 minutes longer, and I invite also the audience, everyone, to be a panelist, so that we all see ourselves and that we have an open room for discussion, for taking part on this. And whoever is also going to stay from the panelists that just presented, yeah, feel free to stay until 10 p.m. Central European time. and then we can ask questions directly to each other and start this open discussion room. For the ones that are leaving, this is just like the first event of a series of ecosystem jams, where we have different speakers from different areas speaking about the importance of regeneration to create frameworks, guidelines that are increasing the awareness that we actually need to change something in the current system that we have. So just together, actually, we can have the forces to change something. If we are trying to compete and individually just try to change something, we won't get as far as together. And it's one of the examples here, looking at all of us, these different organizations coming together, pointing out different things that we're working on, and then just like joining the forces, not reinventing the wheel, improving the wheel together, and yeah, working towards regeneration. So I'm going to make all of you please raise your hand if you're going to stay, and then we open the room for discussion. Yeah.
Real quick before I have to go, I want to thank you all for taking the time to answer part of my questions. And it's actually great that I'm not going to stick around so I can give some space for others to get their questions answered as well. But I really look forward to being in touch with all of you directly and seeing all of these participants, hopefully on future ecosystem jams. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to kind of build on what Fabio is saying, for anyone else in the audience, you know, we have a few topics in mind for future events, and we'd like participation from all of you. So I'll be